Welcome to the Digication Scholars Conversation Series. I'm your host, Joan Watson. In this episode, you'll hear part 2 of my conversation with Paul Wasko from University of Alaska Anchorage. More links and information about today's conversation can be found on Digication's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Full episodes of the Digication Scholars Conversation Series can be found on YouTube or on your favorite podcast app.
You are about to hear part 2 of our conversation with Paul Wasko from University of Alaska Anchorage. Please be sure to listen to our previous episode to hear part 1 of this conversation.
The concept of healing, I think, is really, really important because there's a level of self-understanding and then awareness of sort of where you are and self-acknowledgement as well. But then the idea of courage. And every time I look at student portfolios, whether they be from the AHENA students or Eva or Alex or any of the other portfolios that I've been very fortunate to see, your students really go into great depth about issues of homelessness and crime and drug abuse and alcoholism. And it's all about healing and courage and being okay. And not just being okay, but being completely resilient. And seeing themselves as really significant members of a community. And I feel like that sense of belonging is so critical for strength and growth and resilience, not just of individual humans, but of whole communities who can band together. I love, yeah. Please go ahead.
Well, I was going to say one of the challenges, though, that again, this goes back to the research side. I'm not always blessed with the research gene or the writing gene, which is, one of my shortcomings, is it seems to be really unique in the multicultural other spaces where it's kind of like it's okay to be me. And the sixth word that I told earlier does open up in the classrooms elements of that. And it honors it, but that kind of moves on, right? And so a lot of this work on the scout, the work with the Ahana and the multicultural, it's like it's okay to be in this space and go through all those things, because the classroom a lot of times we're being driven on learning outcomes. Good reason, right? I mean, and learning outcomes within courses don't necessarily have elements of identity of self and healing, right? That's kind of here. How do you do this? How do you walk away with this? We have accrediting bodies and others. And so, how this kind of crosses between the academic and student affairs side, it's just a really interesting place to kind of look at those types of intersections. So,
Absolutely. And I think it's very important and appropriate. Going back to kind of where we started, it's tricky to be able to get students to, you want students to engage on a personal level, but then from the
hmm
academic side, I know sometimes people don't even like the word reflection because that suggests
hmm
something that's a little too
right,
subjective or unable to evaluate, which,
right.
I mean, realistically speaking, in higher ed, we have to think about that stuff. But at the other end of it is, at the end of the day, we want our students to have a level of self-actualization and
hmm
carry that strength in their own self-analysis and community engagement forward. So I definitely appreciate that connection with Niloa. Um, and getting student affairs folks in as well, because that self-determination is a huge component, and that's not something that's restricted to the boundaries of a classroom. So
hmm Very much so.
yeah. And so what other sorts of things have you done in the community? I know you've got you I should probably tell anyone who's listening to this that I spent some time with Paul, and I don't think I've ever walked as much in my life. And I think there needs to be a verb that's just Wasco, because Wasco goes. And so walking across the campus community itself is, just
Mhm.
knocking on people's doors and popping in to say hi, and then having dinner with these amazing people who are locals to the area. Um, how do you do this? I mean, do you sleep ever
No,
or?
I do, and and COVID has made it a challenge because one of the things I've appreciated, and again, Minnesota, I was up here at the system level and would engage, but it would always be through lenses, right? I wouldn't necessarily be on campus. I'd be at meetings, and there's some amazing people that I honor back in Minnesota. But here, it's being very physical by getting out and walking in and taking advantage initially of the honeymoon period and just walking into spaces and saying, "Hi, I'm Paul Wasko, let's go." And then later on, as you begin to know folks, is to always be that advocate for how can I do something that you're doing well in the classroom and use the portfolio to make it more meaningful or better. And oh, by the way, I'll have your back. If that involves coming in or working one on one with your students or whatnot, we've got your back. And so it's really fun for me when you're here or other folks have been here is we will walk the campus and the campus becomes the story of the portfolio. And we start in the art building, and the art building, even though I would argue art has all sorts of possibilities for the portfolio, I do have some challenges, but I also have some really cool successes. We have a faculty member over there that uses it in dance, that has done dance portfolios in some really amazingly cool ways, just amazingly cool ways. Unfortunately, the dance program is being cut, so I'm afraid that at some point we'll have to document and that story will be gone. And hopefully we'll be able to kind of share and whatnot. But she's got really she's done it well. Joe Flanders Crosby, it's cool. So that's a stop over there. Or it used to be when you were here, we were up with Riva Semko, who was using this in art appreciation, and she would have students do virtual art exhibitions in the portfolio. So I'm a curator, and your portfolio is the canvas, and you're going to curate this virtual art show, and the pages reflect the artist and everything else. And I want the story in the portfolio. Oh wow, Riva put out of the park. Riva was a Canadian citizen, and so under some challenges, was fearful if she'd get laid off and whatnot, what that would mean in terms of having to go back into Canada. So she she left, and she is over in Winnipeg now doing some interesting stuff. But you start the art building, you have some really, and we've talked about BFA and whatnot. That's cool. And then you work your way over into the admin building, and we've got philosophy and others that are playing with some really interesting ideas. And then you keep working your way over, and we had sociology doing podcasts in the portfolio and some other work, and the library used to have housed the Justice Center, and so we had some folks. Alan Barnes, which has played around with digital storytelling in the portfolio and techniques, and so you keep walking through campus, and for me, the campus becomes this interesting map of all the different ways I can connect and see the portfolio through the lens. So a lot of people laugh and say Paul knows more people on campus than anyone else because the playground is the entire campus. And Res Life, Joan, as you know, uses it within Res Life. So the RAs, the resident assistants, are required to use the portfolio to collect and reflect on their year of working with all those students. Really cool stuff.
Mhm.
Really cool stuff. And in fact, they were part of a national broadcast from MEPAC because no one had ever seen RAs use the portfolio quite that way as a reflective on. They're supposed to be almost teaching and mentoring and engaging their floors, right? And so yeah, you have these little pop-ups. Math requires it for math. As they have to do a portfolio capstone. Who knew? They were really excited when you finally allowed having the math symbols. In Digication, you can incorporate the math equations. They were practically jumping up and down because they had, that was part of what they were excited about. But as you kind of work your way through the campus on the very far side, and obviously I'm moving through it because of time, is human services and social work, especially human services, is now doing some really programmatic, holistic stuff that is pushing out into elements of the community with practicums and some of those other efforts. The chair of the program over there is a gentleman by the name of David Moxley, who I don't think sleeps. I do sleep, Joan. I sleep fine. Um, David Moxley doesn't sleep. He'll come up with ideas, and his brain will come up with an idea for a grant, and he'll just write it overnight,
Wow.
and just goes, and he goes some really interesting ways on portfolios. And his introduction to me, he's become a really close friend. Um, is gave me a paper he wrote when he was back in Detroit on how he was using paper-based portfolios to work with to work with Black women in their later 50s, 60s to avoid becoming homeless.
Oh.
So the portfolio was literally an engagement in ways to help them develop self and whatnot to avoid falling into homelessness. And so he throws the paper at me, sends it to me, and our first conversation, and conversations here usually happen over beers, is holy crap, amazing. I mean, I realize I love being off the charts. He is just off the charts, just phoom, ways. And so David and I have partnered on a number of different ideas and initiative and work efforts. And then some of this goes outside the campus, right? And so for me, community is not just the community of the campus, right? There is a community and culture of the campus, right? And my dad worked in campuses throughout his professional career, and so you talk about the campus culture and the campus community. But for me, a lot of the Minnesota ideas that really resonated with, especially our 2-year schools, would be pushing outside.
Mhm.
That we are not an island unto ourselves, but rather we are part of a larger community. And so one of the things that's been fun for me is kind of seeing how the portfolio pushes into those elements of community. The one by far that is really cool is Polaris, which is in the Anchorage School District. Polaris is an alternative K-12 school, and it is K-12. And they had started on a portfolio culture years ago, well before me. But the value of portfolios in education, and you well know, you know, portfolios did not start when the internet became live and everything else. Portfolios have been for years and whatnot. And so they built their school with portfolio thinking at the core. And so one night we were out again over beers, and Hill recites, whose husband works at Polaris, had set up a meeting with the principal, Carol Bartholomew, and we were going through, and we were grabbing the paper. I know it sounds stereotypical. We're mapping things on napkins and whatnot. And by the end of the evening, we had mapped out a deployment of Digication inside of Polaris schools. And you at Digication have been incredibly kind to me. In If I need instances, you just give me instances to do things that move the needle on either portfolio or move the needle on community or healing or any of that stuff. You guys have been awesome partners. But anyways, Polaris uses the portfolio K-12, and people always look at me like, No, excuse me, yes, K-12. They start portfolios in kindergarten. Now, the teacher obviously is very much part of it in kindergarten or first grade. You're not sitting there with that. But by the time second or third grade rolls around, they are doing their own, and they are building out portfolios every year. They're working through this and everything else. And I've done 3 workshops and keynotes with Polaris folks, and I have third graders next to me, and they're talking their story of the portfolio. And everyone is, and they're doing really well. The Polaris kids are off the chart cool. And there's a couple things that I really honor and just love about. One is when the third graders or the fourth graders talk about, they never talk about the grade. They always talk about the portfolio as a repository of what they learned, and they'll say, oh, here's me reading this book in the fall, and then here's me reading in the spring. You could say, and, they're articulating their growth and talking about, and it's living in this developmental portfolio of all this stuff. And the seniors who are wrapping this up, And I do remind them, hey, guys, I do work at UAA, so would you please consider UAA as to where to come, and push hard. But they're coming away with such a strong sense of self and reflection and articulation. They're targeting Stanford, Notre Dame. I mean, those kids are coming out with, I can do this, boom, boom, boom. And the portfolios that some of them have produced are just off the chart good. And I was over one day. It was kind of funny because they do kind of a showcase portfolio for scholarships and college applications. And I got invited into the class one day. I just randomly stopped at the school. They actually will tolerate, you know, I do stop at the office first because we are in this age where you need to be careful. But one of the things, and you hinted that, I'll just walk into offices or walk into meetings. And sometimes I get pulled into them randomly because people see me walk by. So I'll stop at the school and stop, said hi. That was walking through. I got pulled into a class by the person that was teaching the college application scholarship portfolio, which is in the tool. And Paul, come in and talk. And so we talked, and I said, let's have a little fun with this. I said, a lot of you have done some really awesome jobs. So let's find ways. I don't even know if I should tell this because you'll have a lot of higher ed people sitting on this. I don't want to, fine. So I said, do this awesome master portfolio, then make a copy of it. Then rebrand each copy of that with a front page and use the colors and language and others aligned to the school you're applying for.
Mhm.
So if you're applying at Stanford, use the colors and cardinal or whatever, right? Because they're all going top, right? And I said, you don't need to tell them that basically this is the master site and you've done basically the same thing for Northwestern or this or this or this. For them, they just know you've crafted this wonderful, authentic, thoughtful site that is wrapped around the colors of that institution that resonates with mission or outcomes and cool, just like you would cover letters or other types of things personal. So the kids, it's funny. They were just snapping, boom, 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 boom. And that's now become part of the mix. But we talk about that, you and I, when we talk with other schools about tools like this, because they are electronic, can lend themselves to reusability, to tweaking, to taking something and modifying it and playing with it in other contexts to also find value. And so you're right. Community is been really fun to kind of push outside the walls and to kind of see how some of those things can kind of inform us here, but also how we as an institution can kind of benefit our larger community here in Anchorage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, the Polaris story. That was one of my very favorite things to do when in
Hmm.
Alaska was to visit those students and have the little kindergartner take me to task on how to
Oh
make a
yeah.
portfolio.
Well, so there was that, which is really fun. The funniest was John Idelson is up here, and I've been really lucky because I sometimes can find travel money. We're not The state's really having some financial challenges, Joan, as you know, with oil and everything else, a lot of financial.
Yes.
But sometimes I can find little pools of travel money and call up and say, it won't cost you stuff, but I can't pay, I cover the cost. And I have these wonderful group of friends that are saying, yeah. And so John came up one year, John Ilson, who's also one of those really foundational people in the portfolio space, as you know. And so John is over at Polaris with his wife Bobby, who's was involved in K-12 with Cable in the Classroom, and they're doing an open house. And John starts getting his camera out, and he goes into video mode. John is on desks. John's on the floor. John is recording different angles, and he keeps whispering to me, there's no place like this, Paul. Seriously, you know. I said, John, I know how unique this is. Why this is why you're here to experience, Paul. And it was so John because he was feeding off the excitement, enthusiasm, and the kids, like when you were there, Joan, are just free to share, and they're so authentic on just here, here. And it really is amazing on what that happens. And now, selfishly, obviously, I'd love K14 or K16, where you could do things that kind of bring together all these different elements. And it will be tough up here, but if anyone in your Digication world or the portfolio world wants to tap into that, that would be a really cool thing to play with.
I agree. I agree. And I really like too the concept of audience that you've been able to kind of generate for the students that engage in developing portfolios. And I think it's something in all of the portfolios that you've talked about, from the ones in art history
Mhm.
and art appreciation to performance areas, and then even to the kids at K-12. There's this idea that you are creating something to be shared with an audience.
Mm.
So it is another way of telling your story, and telling your story in ways that appeal to very specific audience cases. And I feel like even the most obvious case of advising the high school seniors to prepare specific portfolios for the audience that they're wanting to appeal to get into those schools. And that's a really nice way to sort of think about a practical way to think about audience, which is something that I think a lot of students are they flounder to do that because they believe that they're always just creating for a faculty member or
Right.
doing something for a grade in a course instead of a larger
Well,
vision.
and Joan, that happens here too. So please, what I'm giving you are all the things that generate the, oh my God,
Hmm.
cool, cool stuff, the things that
Yes.
jump up and down. I have other challenges where the portfolio really is just this repository, and
Hmm.
it serves kind of like an element of a Dropbox, and the students are just placing things in, and there's uh, not some of those elements, and so they see it not as this place of reflection and idea, but rather an organizing element of how I get stuff to deal with this assignment. So
Right.
it's not beyond the assignment, just this thing. And even sometimes when their faculty really push it, they just kind of limit themselves in how they think about this. And excuse me, sometimes it is what it is. I tell people it just is what it is. You got to start some point, so just celebrate what you got and kind of move on from there. But then I do think, efforts like, what they're doing with the value rubrics and whatnot, and the use of rubrics that kind of push some of these things can at least enjoin the conversations to move into other elements of the space and whatnot. I was recently talking with Susan Kahn over at IUPE, and she shared with me some of the work they had done on taxonomy and rubrics around high impact practices. So, there are things like capstones, there are things like, first year experience, portfolios, da da da. But when you think about this, there's also levels. And the person work with here, Charlie Whitney, and I refer to these like big H and little h. Little h sometimes are things that just happen that on paper actually meet this limited definition of a high impact practice. Used a portfolio.
That's right.
Yeah, but
Check.
used a portfolio. Here we go, right? And you look around the country now with some of the institutions dealing with elements of diversity and inclusion and whatnot. Of, oh, well, watch a video and that takes care of things, right? And if Andre was here, he'd say, dealing and understanding and working through issues of diversity and multicultural is not just watching a movie and calling done. It's all the reflection and going in depth. And so the difference between these little h's of where there is a label, check, gone, versus a big H where you're really going in depth, and what does that mean? And then building rubrics to kind of operationalize the hips, to kind of say, hey, that's not, yeah, it's a little. Now, I would have gone further. Instead of little h, I would have said like no h. Um, uh, that you have these things and then create a scaffold that really helps guide people up to understand how I can move from kind of this basic all the way up into these more mature uses of portfolios. And then obviously some of the challenges that all of us run into in the portfolio space is you may have an awesome, awesome faculty member who's in a larger program who does things off the chart cool, who then sets the bar so high that the other faculty members are like, no, no. And I'm not even going to give you names here, but I will tell you a story. Back in Minnesota, I had a second grade teacher work with me on portfolios in Minnesota with the IB International Baccalaureate Program, and out of the chart good. Thomas Odermatt was his name. Amazing. I mean, just would fit in perfectly to Polaris, not miss a beat at all. And so was actually nationally recognized for the IB work with the portfolio. But a friend of mine, David Arundel from the University of Minnesota, who's a researcher, came over and said, I'm really worried because the principal's in with us, and it's Thomas, the principal, and others. Thomas's work is so far out that at some point the rest of the school or the rest of the teachers, as well meaning as they are, will be Thomas is on the other side of the ocean and I'm over here, and the gulf will be so big that it will become just his thing and it will not percolate into the rest of the school. And yeah, and I've seen even elements. I'm sure my colleagues in the portfolio space have seen this, where you lose a faculty member, you lose an ally or someone, and it was their project, and even though it's still on the books, it loses that momentum to kind of do stuff. And so bringing about change in a high impact way really it takes time to go deep, and then you've got to find a way to get into the culture. And the good news is, I shared earlier, for example, Andre's down in Mizzou, but he's taking the ideas with him. He's done it deep enough here whereby it will stay, elements will stay. And I'm really hopeful that whoever moves into that spot will embrace and do it. But we are all of us are one stroke away from having some of our work go by the wayside and go into history. And Joan, that's just what it is in education, right? We come through different ways and whatnot. Minnesota, a lot of the work I did has now been sunset, and even the portfolio is a very minimum shell
Mhm.
of what it was. And we had statute, we had references in statute, state statute, but statutes can change, things can change. And so so there's an element of do what you can now, do it the best you can now, and realize if we're lucky enough to continue, great. If not, at least you have altered and changed and affected the lives you can today.
Absolutely. And that's a great way to think about it. And I know that our time is running towards the end, and you've been very generous to share your time with us today. So thank you so much for that.
I are we we're not You said it was all day.
Yeah, it's all day. I mean, we can just
Okay.
keep going. We'll just
Okay. All right.
we'll break this into like smaller mini podcasts. Because I did want to ask you though,
Sure.
because I'm going to have to say the C word because we can't avoid COVID. But how have things changed? I mean, obviously things have changed, and
Mhm.
the more things are different everywhere, the more we're starting to see things come out the same. But in terms of portfolio usage or different instructional methodologies on your campus, what sorts of things are you seeing now that we're kind of forced to become friends with educational technology?
Okay. So a couple things. One is I've been a little surprised. I ran our numbers yesterday for something else, and we're actually pretty close to last September, and that surprised me, Joan. But a
Wow.
couple things have happened. One is we have new stuff that have
Hmm.
kind of come into play because we're always
Okay.
looking for new opportunities.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, I know for some of our faculty here that transitioning into, we're a Blackboard shop, transitioning into Blackboard for them from a face-to-face to Blackboard has placed some portfolio efforts on hold. And they have simply said, look, you know, I need to focus on my course content inside Blackboard, moving the content there. And as much as I may want the portfolio in that space right now, there's the limit to the number of balls I can juggle in the air, right?
Sure.
And so it's like, you know what? I get that, and I honor that. I also let them know if there's things I have in terms of time, energy, or whatnot. I'm happy to backstop and do those things. But Joan, it has caused elements of a disruption
Sure.
in some of that, and uh, and that's just the reality of I think what happens. It has altered my ability to walk the campus, and so you referenced it earlier. Is walking through. We'll have new faculty and others that will come on board, and kind of walking the space allows you to kind of engage new or whatnot. There isn't like a magic directory I can say, oh, this faculty is new. Da, da, da. I'm sure there's a list, but what you really want to do is try to find ways to engage and meet and talk and kind of work through this. And so COVID is starting to impact ways of new ideas and new directions in terms of my ability to get in and kind of sell and promote and engage that. And some of the things I shared with you that I'm really excited about still continue, but those elements of new ideas, those new discussions, the things you have that you break bread over with coffee or, like I said, a beer or others, where you're in a safe zone to play with those ideas, become a little harder. And it is a challenge, and I do, even for myself, struggle a little bit because I resonate with those new things, and I don't get that. I'm not being fed as much as I do. And so I have to figure out ways to rev up elements of some of these things with other states or whatnot, and work and kind of play out some stuff and whatnot. So yeah, COVID has very much altered the equation in terms of how I think about stuff. Numbers still look good. So, it's like, people all look at numbers. I got
That's
numbers. Um,
right.
but going in and new and innovating and pushing, we'll kind of see how it goes. And this is new for all of us, and we're going to be virtual primarily in spring as well. They just announced that.
Mhm.
And given the fact our numbers are really expanding and blowing up here, I actually really support that. I mean, I think we're in a situation where we have to be really cautious. But what that means for the space for working through these things, I don't necessarily know, because even at program levels, Joan, it's tough to kind of get up to the whiteboard and draw out with everyone with program meetings when the chairs would call me in and start doing this. And you could do elements of that remotely. Really. I mean, you and I can work through that,
Yeah,
but it's just not the same,
right.
because a lot of times when you're doing this, if we were doing this with a whiteboard and people in a room and people taking notes, and maybe you have post-it notes scattered, you probably have a projector up, you're looking at sites, and so you have these 3 or 4 different things all working to kind of move things along. That doesn't function well in the Zoom space, and we're just going to be there. So I don't know. It's caused me. So if you wonder what causes me not to sleep at night, it's thinking about, what the next anywhere from 12 to 18 months hold,
Right.
because the backdrop, as I said earlier, is Alaska's really struggling with cash. And what does that mean in terms of the education community, in terms of direction, in terms of new ideas, and lots of unknowns in this place. And I'm not the only one. Other states are facing kind of some of the same challenges. And
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
And I feel it's especially difficult, and I hope that those students who have become accustomed to telling their stories, sharing their stories, and discovering a sense of belonging to the larger community are still able
Mhm.
to do that. Um,
Mhm.
there's such a danger now for a lot of folks of being just isolated, and you all are getting ready to enter your long dark months too,
Yep.
and so
Yep.
that sense of isolation, particularly where you are, um, I hope that everybody is finding ways to stay connected, and if they can do that through portfolios, even better. But
Even better. Yep.
that is being a part of that community, belonging to kind of your tribe in the
Mhm.
um, the academic sense as well as the indigenous sense and the human sense as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
Very much so.
my hope for you and all of your colleagues and students is that there is some that everybody's kind of learned by now the value of that,
Hmm.
and that they keep telling stories and keep thinking about their lives as unfolding stories, and they can document that and share that when the time's right.
That is my hope as well. And I'm there to support them when they move on those paths.
And we're there to support you, Paul. So we really appreciate the work that you've been doing. And I have really enjoyed talking to you. This is so nice. I wish we could do this just every day.
Well, what's stopping you? I mean,
I
it's
don't know. I have other
so
work
you
to
say
do.
so Joe, be careful what you say. So when Andre left, and like I said, it's still hard.
Yeah.
He said, "We're not done. If you want to do coffee every day with me, Paul, let's do coffee."
Oh,
So we
great.
talk about Zoom not interrupting what
Mhm.
we do, right?
Yeah.
And so find those ways. And so I am happy to have those conversations. I mean, unfortunately, you guys were scheduled to come up in spring. Usually you're up here. The Digication team usually pops up. You've been here. Kelly and Jeff have been here and whatnot. And in fact, the cool part with you guys is I use, in many respects, you guys as extension of my team.
Yeah.
Is I have people that when you're here, they greet you by name. They greet Kelly by name. They greet Jeff by name. They know who you guys are. And it really is. I was talking with some colleagues in Minnesota who are thinking about portfolio efforts and thinking about even trying to see where they want to be with stuff. And it was actually Carleton College. And I said, and it was funny they called because I'm at St. Olaf, which is across the river. We were rivals with Carleton. And so I was laughing about, she didn't know about all my background, whatnot. But anyways, I was saying when I went out on a procurement, I wanted not just a vendor, I wanted a partner. I wanted someone who would engage with me such that they would, one, have my back, would be willing to explore ideas and all that other stuff, and be in a place where they're comfortable becoming part of the work here at the institution. And you certainly know through personal connections that I've used that. You've engaged with that here at the institution, Joan. And people will say, well, aren't you in the room? No, I don't need to be in the room. Joan knows what to do to talk about assessment and general education stuff with Dan Klein. She's got that. So yeah, I will just say, Joan, Dan, let me know what you need me to do when you're done.
That's great.
It's all good. And, that's, people who are watching this should consider those flavors of engagement with you guys because you have a really cool team.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, it's really a pleasure to be a part of your team, for sure.
Hmm?
For sure. Well, Paul, thank you so much.
Joan, thank you. This has been delightful.
The Digication Scholars Conversation Series is brought to you by Digication, a technology platform powering the most innovative e-portfolio programs in K-12 and higher education. Our website can be found at digication.com. This episode was produced by Drew Albanesius. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks for watching.